In this next section, we are going to look at making measurements to given numbers of significant figures. So in number 1, or just in general, when we make measurements, a device doesn't always give us the number of significant figures that we want to record our value to. So oftentimes we have to round to the appropriate number of significant figures. So let's look at number 1, which says, what is the length of the worm to one significant figure? So if I were just looking at this, I would say, okay, here's my worm. It goes from 0, we are starting at the beginning, and then it goes to a little bit past 5. So that's not exactly 5. I'm going to make an estimate of that second digit. It's not quite 5.5 either, so I'm going to estimate it's maybe 5.2. And of course I have to pay attention to my units, and that's centimeters, so 5.2 centimeters. But it says, what is the length of the worm not to 2 significant figures, which is what I just wrote down, but to just one significant figure. So I need to round before I record my final answer. So that one, this first value I get to keep, that one significant figure, and then I need to look at the next number over to determine if it's going to stay a 5, or if I'm going to round up to a 6. So looking at that, my rules of rounding say that if I have 5 or greater, so greater than or equal to 5, we round up, otherwise we round down. A 2 is not greater than or equal to 5, so I'm going to round down and keep a 5. So my rounded value, I'm going to put the little approximately, my rounded value will be just 5 centimeters. And now that just has one significant figure, and I guess I should record my answer in the correct spot. So 5 centimeters. Notice that I have to make sure I have a unit. Whenever we take a measurement, the measurement is not valid unless you have a unit on it. I mean, if I didn't put a unit, this could be 5 centimeters, or 5 meters, or 5 miles, or 5 kilometers. I don't know. So we have to provide a unit so that we know what it is we're talking about and what the scale is. Moving on to number 2. Now we're looking at volume. It says, what volume is held in the graduated cylinder to the right? Report your measurement to 2 significant figures. Okay. So let's look at our graduated cylinder. Now, first of all, we need to remember how to read a graduated cylinder appropriately. We don't look at the very tippy top right here. We look at the bottom of the curve, and we call this the meniscus, the bottom of the curve. So we're not reading from the top here, we're reading from the bottom, and I'm actually going to clear that real quick so we can see it a little better. So we're reading from the very bottom, which will be this line right here. The next thing we have to do to read a graduated cylinder is we have to look at how many graduations are between each number. So I have 20 and 30, and my water level, my meniscus, is somewhere between the 20 and the 30. And it is easy to assume that these graduations are each 1 milliliter, but that's not always the case. We ought to check. So let's double check, and I'm just going to count. So 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So each graduation is indeed 1 milliliter, but it is important to double check that. So now that we know that, we have 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So our meniscus is at 24. And of course we need to know our unit. So looking at our graduated cylinder, it should say, so this one says milliliters. So our amount of water, our volume of water is 24 milliliters. And it's said to record it to 2 significant figures, and 24 already has 2 significant figures, so I'm just going to record that value, 24 milliliters. Next, what is the mass of the nuts on the scale? Report your answer to 1 significant figure. Okay, so this is an electronic balance, which makes reading off a measurement really easy because it does just tell us what the measurement is, but we do have to be careful of a few things. First of all, electronic balances can give measurements in different units, so we have to pay careful attention to what unit the measurement is being given in. And it should say somewhere on the screen of the scale. So it's kind of small here, but right there, there's a small g up, and I just actually covered it when I drew my arrow, so I'll just erase the end of that real quick so you can see. But this G right here means that we're doing our measurement in grams, but that can change. We do need to check that. Okay, and then it says report your answer to one significant figure, and it says 300.0 grams. So if I were to count significant figures here, remember that we start counting at the first non-zero number, and then our zeros that are trailing, these trailing zeros, are significant if and only if they're to the right of a decimal point. But that's a little tricky here. A decimal point also kind of counts as a non-zero number. So these zeros, they are not to the right of the decimal point, but they are sandwiched between a non-zero number, the 3, and then a zero that's to the right of the decimal point. So this zero is significant. The 3 is significant, which also makes these zeros significant as well because they're sandwiched between two significant values. So currently this value has 4 significant figures. And we need to write our answer to just one significant figure. So we need to round. But this is actually incredibly easy because if we get rid of that decimal point, that makes the zeros that are currently sandwiched, that makes these no longer significant. So we can do just that. Instead of putting 300 point, we can put 300. And now these trailing zeros here are no longer significant because there is no decimal point. No decimal. So these are not significant anymore, so we only have one significant digit, the 3, which is what we are asked to do. So we're going to put 300 grams. And sometimes recording values to correct significant figures does take a little bit of thought and creativity. We just have to think through the rules and how we can report our value appropriately. Last but not least, we're looking at a thermometer now, and it says, what is the reading on this thermometer in degrees Celsius? Give your answer to 2 significant figures. So first of all, looking at our thermometer, notice that we have 2 sets of numbers. We have on this side, on the left side, we have degrees Fahrenheit, and on the right side, we have degrees Celsius. And oftentimes thermometers are like this. They have both Fahrenheit and Celsius markings, but we have to be careful that we read the correct one. And sometimes thermometers only have one or the other set, and we have to make sure that we are looking at our units that we are given. So we're asked to record in degrees Celsius. We want to look at the right side, and we're just going to go up until the mercury stops. Or actually they're now alcohol generally. And then we need to look and see how far apart each of our graduation marks is. So we have somewhere between 40 and 45, but we need to make sure that each of these markings is in fact 1 degree Celsius. So we have 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. So they are each just 1. So our reading is at 41 and 42. 42 degrees Celsius. And it says we need 2 significant figures, and 42 already has that. So all we're going to do is record that value, 42 degrees Celsius.